So hello and welcome to Dubai, where we are at the Mena Regional Climate Week, the first in-person climate week for a couple of years and the first in the Middle East and North Africa region. And delighted to be here to see many old friends, but to see in particular one new friend, Dr Mahmoud Mohieldin, who's the new high-level climate action champion, recently appointed by Egypt as the incoming presidency of COP27. And so looking forward to getting to know Mahmoud a little bit, but also to sharing some of the content of the year's program that we've just launched for the work of the Marrakech Partnership in the run-up to COP27. But to get us started, Mahmoud, I thought it'd be nice for everybody to learn a little bit about you. People will have read your CV and know about your experience as a minister and your work in the World Bank and the IMF and as a special envoy for the SG. But what about Mahmoud, the man behind that? Tell us a little bit about when you first, maybe why climate change resonates with you as an important issue.
Well, likewise, I'm very happy and pleased to see you here and all of the colleagues supporting our work as well. This the second time we meet in person. A few days ago we were together in Washington, but today with this very big gathering here in Dubai, talking about the global priorities, the regional dimensions of our work, and launching as well the our work program. You ask very specific and nice question, I would say, about my background. So normally, when I talk about climate change, I take it from that holistic approach on the SDGs, where climate is Sustainable Development Goal number 13. But closer to me is my background from my life back home in Egypt. I have a farming background. My family is coming from the village of Kafr Shukr, which is like 1 hour away from Cairo, specializing as a family in growing citrus fruit. And now the typical farmer in Egypt had her or his own story about the impact of climate change on the day-to-day kind of life, what they can and cannot produce, how they can really do a better job within the constraints. They might not really be getting it from the sophisticated technical reports coming from the UN system or from the UNFCCC or from the scientists working in this area, but they just see it that way and they have many questions. So in my work, I hope that I can really have this kind of a big transformation from big ideas to solutions in the field, from the summits to how we can really be of help to the ordinary man and those who are really confronting the realities of life. And this basically could be a great thing one can do, is basically from the kind of discussions of the big picture to the specific project that could really be helpful to people around the world.
That desire to make sure that this is real reminds me of something that Sheila Patel said, who's one of our ambassadors in the race to resilience. She runs Slum Dwellers International. Mm-hmm. She said to us last year that it's the poor women of the world who will decide if we're really making an impact.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it's very much the case when we deal with this matter in what we call holistic approach. So it's climate, very serious, very important. It's very well established by the scientists that we are running really against tough race against time. But it's basically the links between climate and poverty, climate and women, climate and opportunities for work. So while we might be talking about 2050, decarbonization and the zero targets, we talk about the end of the century and how can we keep this planet safe. But it's basically what we are doing today in order to make this kind of a difference and impact going forward.
So tell us a little bit about, you've gone down a particular route in your career, and it's sort of diplomatic and global and multilateral. In an alternative life, what might you have done if you hadn't followed the path that you followed now?
Well, I don't know if it is a criticism or praise, but I was being considered as a man with multiple hats. So I'm happy and proud to be affiliated with my university back home, Cairo University. I'm affiliated with few universities around the world, from the UK, Durham University, here in the UK, the United Arab Emirates University in Al Ain. It's #1 university here in this country, hosting us today, and few universities as well in the East. So this could be really my kind of permanent hat as an academic. And this is the thing, really, that you are not just doing research and doing a bit of teaching from time to time, but you are connected with generations,
yes.
challenging you, giving you tough questions to answer, and this kind of getting this kind of dynamic update of your knowledge through the interaction. So this is one hand. The other one that you mentioned, being an executive in government, 15 years in government in Egypt as an advisor and a minister, gave me a bit of a background. And as you know, being a minister in a country like Egypt is really a tough job, to be very diplomatic about it. And then you mentioned my involvement with the multilateral system, with the World Bank, with the IMF, with the UN. So I hope that I can really get all of such experience with all humility, I would say, because it's limited, although that may sound deep and rich and prestigious, but basically what I can get from all of these networks in order to support the mission of climate and climate action.
No, it's interesting. You mentioned the academic career, and maybe in another life that could have been all of it. It's interesting though that you do wear these many hats, and I can already see the real benefit that those interconnecting networks bring to the work of the Champion. It's also been really nice. I've already met quite a few people who've been students of yours. Some of them quite recent, so quite young. Yep. Some of them
are ministers.
Some of them are ministers already. So
CEOs, heads of organizations, heads of regulatory agencies. Yeah, but the one that is, I would say, very resilient and with a persona of her own is my daughter. So my main challenger. Whenever I'm happy with something to deliver, she can always say, well, you can do better than this. Yeah.
Great.
This is the kind of generation we're dealing with.
Yes. Yeah. Well, let's move a little bit to the work of the high-level champions. And, there's always a transition from one presidency to the next. I think one of the things I've enjoyed most in the role is that because the champions very much straddle three COPs in a way, because you work with the past and the future. So I work closely with the Chilean champion Gonzalo, who you've met now, and that partnership brought particular flavour. But say a little bit about what you see as the priorities for COP27 from your point of view and from the Egyptian presidency's point of view.
Well, without making it very complicated, so why don't I just ask you, why shouldn't I be doing as a champion? I appreciate that during the time since I saw you first time, you were very keen to share a positive experience on what to do and what I should be making some more emphasis on. But with your experience, with your involvement, what shouldn't I be doing given the constraint of time?
That's a good question, and maybe I'm not the best person to answer because I tend to abuse the constraints of time. I think, well, one thing I think, and this is very relevant to the meetings today, is not trying to do the work of the Marrakech Partnership for them. We have an amazing community of partners who are also, I think, really concentrating on being a champion for that work. And that, of course, that doesn't mean just saying how great everybody is. Sometimes it means challenging them, but often it does mean helping to lift things up and being aware of the work of everyone so that we're optimizing it. And I think the other thing is to make sure that we're really focusing on the role of non-state actors, because that's the unique part of the role. Any time that we're thinking about what national governments could do different or better, that we're approaching it through the lens of how the momentum in the non-state actor community can help governments. So I think that would be the two things. Make the most of the Marrakech Partnership, that's our biggest asset, and focus on the role of the non-state actor, because I always come back to the mandate, which is quite simple at the end of the day.
Right, but so what surprised you the most, positively or negatively? What exactly that made you really happier than you expected, or not that happy of the experience that you had so far? Major surprises.
I think I mean, maybe it shouldn't have been a surprise, and it probably won't be a surprise to you, given where you come from and the roles you've had. But I was, most of my work in climate change has been really on mitigation and technology and multinational businesses. So it's had a bias towards global north, centres of capital, centres of industry, and so one of my first surprises was the extent to which the Marrakech Partnership is biased towards the global north. That's one of the reasons why we've built into the program a commitment to regionalise, because we recognise, just as we're finding here, that the issues around water security are very different in Western Europe and North America than they are in Mena. So that was a surprise and something I was a bit disappointed. I think it's something to really committed to work on. I think we'll work on that together. The pleasant surprise, I think, really just the just incredible amount of talent. I mean, you've talked about this already in the brief time we've known each other, that it's great to have people who are passionate, but to have people who are passionate who really know their stuff.
Yeah, what I call the real champions behind the champions. Yeah. That network of very knowledgeable, skillful, passionate people who really believe in the mission, and they put all of the time behind it. I was telling colleagues that they have as well a very interesting mix in the way that they have been involved in this kind of big network in terms of contractual arrangement, the time that they are providing. It's an interesting mix of people.
And that's a good point, because every presidency that comes in, often doesn't have hundreds of people who have been working on the topic for decades.
Yeah.
So I think actually one of the things that the Marrakech Partnership has to offer the multilateral process, especially as we move from negotiation to more focus on implementation, is that within that community there are people who've been working on these issues for 10, 20, sometimes 30 years. So there's a deeply knowledgeable and deeply interconnected network that's available to support the process.
Yeah, perhaps that's why I'm more comfortable when I'm talking more now about from summits to solutions, from claims and pledges into actions. We see those very specialized women and men who spend their lives, despite some of them are very much young age, but they have been 5 years, 10 years doing nothing but in a very particular area of work. So when we talk about holistic approach, this doesn't mean diluting the specific expertise in a particular topic, but basically about how can we work as better coordinators, matchmakers, in order to get all of this kind of talent and skills implemented where it matters most.
Yeah, no, I think that one of the things I've been learning is that's I think particularly relevant in the global South, where if we just come at this from I always think of the spreadsheet of greenhouse gas emissions, right? If we come at this very technically in terms of reducing emissions, then we're not meeting people where they are at the nexus of development, gender, health, climate mitigation and resilience. It is a more holistic, I think there's a more holistic argument needed. If you're just talking about decarbonising steel, you can have quite a technical, narrow focused conversation. I think that's one of the reasons why we need to regionalise, is to make sure we're engaging with non-state actors as in the world they live in, rather than some abstract spreadsheet of greenhouse gas emissions reductions.
Very good. One of the things I came across this very interesting book by Nobel Prize winner John Tirole, when he wrote that book about the global public goods. Yeah. And the climate change and the agenda of climate change is basically about that. But if we bring the global public good to the knowledge of the common people, those who do not really get themselves involved in day-to-day kind of exposure to the jargon that we are using, from mitigation to adaptation to loss and damage to innovation and finance. So if I can, with your experience, just trying to identify what we are doing different or in a complementary way to the parties negotiating the priorities. So if we start, and they realize that the non-state actors and the champions have something like an equivalent name to every track and work. So let's see what's working and what's not in each one of them. And this could be a nice segue to the introduction of what's new and different to our work program. So how do you assess progress first on mitigation and net zero?
Yeah, so first of all, I think really good point that one of the things that we try hard to do is use language which resonates with a much broader audience than a technical negotiating audience. So for even something as simple as calling our main mitigation campaign the Race to Zero instead of our mitigation campaign.
Yes.
So it's just something that everybody immediately understands. We don't even call it the Race to Net Zero because even net zero is a technical term. Of course, we mean the Race to Net Zero. I think that campaign has got off to an amazing start. Really surpassed our expectations when we set out to normalise the goal of net zero amongst the non-state actor community. And now we know there's over 5,000 businesses, over 1,000 cities. Massive chunk of the finance sector. So I think there we basically over-delivered on our initial expectation. So a couple of things that are really relevant now to move on in the work program are to focus on delivery, as you've said a lot from summits to solutions. I like that. So that's really about all the breakthroughs for each sector, really focusing on how many green steel plants are being invested in, not just how many companies have committed to net zero in the future, and also the credibility, like real focus on the standards around net zero. So that's both continuing to raise the standards of Race to Zero. We're going through the consultation process now, but also working with the standard setters in the world like ISO and the newly formed ISSB to see if we can help accelerate the path from NGOs developing standards, which is often the way things start, to governments pointing to standards in regulations. So that combination of focus on action and credibility and trust will be a big part of building on the momentum we've already seen in the Race to Zero.
So I can say that you are positive and optimistic with the progress and the buy-in by the business sector and the rest of the partners of development and supporting climate when it comes to the Race to Zero and the mitigation with the which is the equivalent in the formal track. But would you be kind enough to tell us what's happening in the adaptation? Because we see many question marks about what's happening, the progress in this area, and what we are doing to support progress in this track.
Yeah, I mean we've worked really hard to try and elevate. We've as you know we find that adaptation and resilience is like a technical term from the negotiation. So we tended to focus on the term resilience, which seems to resonate more with people who are not embedded in the negotiations. And last year we really tried to elevate resilience as a topic with the launch of the Race to Resilience 6 months after we launched the Race to Zero. And for example, the creation of the Resilience Hub at COP26, which I hope is something that will be repeated at COP27, because it created a focal point for the family, I would say, and it really feels like a family of people and organisations working on resilience to really come together around solutions. But again,
but where do you see the role of the business sector? Perhaps on the mitigation side or the net zero, the role of the business sector now has a good track record. We can really see good solutions coming, especially on the energy side of the story. But where do you see the business sector and the rest of the stakeholders
on resilience,
the resilience side?
Well, I guess one first thing to say is that, of course, a lot of our stakeholders are the sub-national governments, so cities and regions. Local so a lot of the resilience issues really land there, almost more than national governments. So there's a great community working on resilience solutions for cities and regions. I think secondly, in terms of business, it depends on the sector and on the again, in order to try and make resilience more accessible, we always talk about the three main communities who are most effective: the urban poor, so slum dwellers, smallholder farmers, and coastal and river dwellers. So for obvious reasons, those are the three groups. So I think if you're a construction company, then the issue of how do we move away from 1 billion people living in slums is something that you can do something about. If you're a food company, then you're often relying on millions of smallholder farmers in your value chain. In the finance sector, one thing we're really exploring is what's the role of insurance and the insurance approaches to this area of loss and damage, which often is about uncovered losses. So I think there's different aspects of resilience that we're exploring with the local governments and then with the finance and the business community, depending on the sector and the community that we're talking about.
I would say that this is a new area of work that was not explored sufficiently. It was opened up for discussion during Glasgow, but I think now it's the opportunity to bring the contractual savers and the institutional investors and the role of the insurance sector. They come in different shapes and sizes. We see their equivalent, especially in the farming industry, with the cooperatives, and they have insurance products of their own. But this industry has a lot to offer to climate and the solutions for climate from the finance perspective as well.
Yes, I think that's why one of the main themes of our work program this year is mainstreaming resilience. We set a goal of partners in the race to resilience reaching 4 billion people. That's about the level that is needed in terms of lives and livelihoods made more resilient. I think the other thing we've just touched upon there is really driving the mobilization of finance. And you know way more about this than I do, the challenges of mobilizing private finance in emerging and developing economies, particularly given the current circumstances where fiscal headroom is being squeezed.
And there are major debt challenges as well. So we need really to be very innovative and practical, providing finance solutions. What is the comparative advantage of public finance? Where are the comparative advantages of business sector? Yeah. How can they complement each other? And then in the time that we are living through, post-COVID and even before COVID-19, many countries were really facing huge debt challenges. So how can we really do a better job in financing sustainability with a focus on climate without increasing the debt burden facing different countries? And how can we be more equity finance based, more investment based, rather than being debt-based in the solutions?
Yeah, and I think a lot of that work we'll be doing with our partnership with Mark Carney and the Glasgow Finance Alliance for Net Zero. I think trying to promote this idea of country platforms and making sure they bring in private finance in the appropriate way. But I also think we can use the voice of non-state actors to remind the world that there's this debt issue is not going away. In fact, it's getting worse, and that there's a limit to what the private sector can do on that. Even though you've talked a bit about debt for nature swaps, which I think maybe is something we should promote more with the finance community.
We have two examples, and it's good that we have not just a framework, but a couple of practical examples from Seychelles and from Belize, where they did nature debt swaps, when they did climate debt swaps as well. So that is basically about replicability, scale, and how to bring more actors together in this. I have just one quick question before I ask you to give us what's new and different in the work program. Perhaps when we talk about one of the contentious areas of work, which is loss and damage. In Glasgow, the file was opened wide, but now we need to know what can we really be doing to support the discussions in this area and to be more constructive from our perspective as coordinators of the non-state actors. What are you expecting, especially from Sharm El-Sheikh summit on this?
Well, I mean, I think to sort of sum up the overall work program, a lot of this is about implementation across resilience, finance, mitigation. Like we've had huge rise in commitments and promises. So I think that's a consistent thing. I think that there's a couple of things that are significantly new that we'll have to work hard on with Marrakech partners. One is regionalization, which is why it's great to be launching the program in Mena, to make sure that the work of the Marrakech Partnership really lands in every major has regional relevance in the Middle East, in North Africa, in Sub-Saharan Africa, in Latin America, where we've been building some small teams and partnerships. I do think that really leaning in to think about the role of non-state actors in addressing current climate losses, and so the role of public-private partnerships on insurance, the role of cities and regions in promoting those solutions is going to be something that hasn't been explored enough, as you say.
So you have a few seconds to give us highlights on what's new and different in the work program. You emphasize this issue of operationalization, the emphasis on practice and execution and the implementation. But if you give us very quickly the main subtitles of the work program.
Well, mainstreaming resilience, mobilizing finance, accelerating implementation, driving credibility and trust, and regionalizing the work. And I think the final thing I would say is just to go back to reminding ourselves that the mandate is created by the countries who come together in the multilateral system that say, Mahmoud, Nigel, with the Marrakech partners, help us implement the Paris Agreement faster. And so perhaps the final word I'll end on is that we're now moving into the phase of the global stocktake. And I think there's an opportunity for the work of non-state actors to help governments be more confident that they can go faster, what we call the ambition loop, that for every aspect of the challenge across finance, resilience and mitigation, there are some non-state actors going faster than their national governments. And so that could be a source of inspiration and insight to drive that ambition loop to go faster.
Very good. Can you share super fast what we are doing better in terms of transparency, governance and accountability?
I think we saw this sort of division in Glasgow between all the enthusiasm from leaders, state and non-state, for commitments, and the deep scepticism on the street and the younger generation and the civil society. So two things there, and then maybe we'll wrap. One is to really work with the standards bodies to point to the fact that we know that voluntarism isn't enough. It's not going to solve it. It's the way many movements start.
Self-standards, benchmarks.
Standards to regulation, that pathway. And secondly is just to keep enhancing our own transparency processes. So we're in the middle of a consultation process for the Race to Zero now, and transparency is a big element of that. And we'll be introducing an additional accountability mechanism so that we can make sure that all of our stakeholders can hold members of the Race to Zero accountable for delivering on what they said they'd deliver, just as we all need to hold our leaders in every sector of society accountable for delivering on their promises under the Paris Agreement.
Right. Excellent. Looking forward to working with you and the excellent team to deliver better from now until Sharm El-Sheikh.
Great. Thank you, Mahmoud.
Thank you, Nigel.